Indy. Hopefully we can have a few productive days here. Our coaching staff actually stay back in Houston. D'Amico will be here a little bit later this afternoon. We just felt the best thing for the new staff, which is kind of stay back, kind of work on scheme, kind of familiarize ourselves with our team, continue to work through that. So try to be efficient with our time, try to get some work done here. I'd say our college scouting staff done an awesome job at this point. Lip, Tom Hayden, Zeke, John, the whole group. They've done a lot of the heavy lifting to this point. So, try to maximize our opportunities here this week and then head back to Houston here later the week, get ready for free agency, and keep building the team. So exciting time for the team, exciting time for the organization, exciting time for the city. So let's try to keep building on some good days here and keep stacking a few things together. So take some questions. Go ahead, John. You can start off. Yeah, we're really looking at the entire kind of team building process. So we've kind of started with our team, kind of had D'Amico and the staff had an opportunity to look at our team. We know we're going to add to this position. We have one player on the roster currently. I'd say it's probably going to be a combination of draft to free agency, could be 2 draft, could be 2, however it goes. So we're going to look at whatever resources we have available to us, try to make the right decision. But really, it's about the total team building process. It's not really about one position. So we're going to be very thoughtful. We're going to take our time to try to make good decisions all throughout the spring.
And on that, whenever you're organizing an entire roster, how do you value the quarterback position, maybe data-wise, contract-wise, maybe somebody on a rookie deal? What's your philosophy?
Yeah, I don't think you're making decisions based on data. You're making decisions based on what you think is best for your organization and your team. So, we have 50 players on a team, give or take. So, we're going to add 40 players to the team. So, you'll probably add, 15 to 20 for agency, give or take, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, probably a little less. Right now we have 11 draft picks, so call it 10 to 12 draft picks, and then however many players we sign after free agency. So, again, philosophically, D'Amico and I feel the same way. It's really not about one player. It's not about one position. It's about building a good team. And if you have a good team, that gives you the best chance to go out there on Sunday and have some success. So that's what our focus is going to be.
Nick, what have these early days in the transition with D'Amico been like? What have you learned about him, and I guess vice versa?
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. He was going back and forth there a little bit. So I tell you, that first week kind of got a little taxed, but he's been very, very open-minded, very thoughtful. We kind of take our time, really want to think through decisions as we assemble the coaching staff. That was a big part of it. Have a few candidates here, talk to a number of different candidates. All right, he wants to sleep on it, give it some thought. All right, and then come back. All right, yeah, that makes sense. What about this? He's very open-minded. We have a lot of open communication. There's been a lot of dialogue. We actually met as a staff yesterday, offensively and defensively. We kind of went through their evaluation. We gave them some free agents to look at. So wanted to hear the staff's thoughts. D'Amico has his thoughts. I have my thoughts. And we're really going to try to blend everything together here as we're going through. So he's been great. Everything that I think that I heard or knew about him beforehand has come to fruition. And he is who he is. So I think that's the one thing you want to see, like the things you experience during an interview process. Then you're actually to see him firsthand, up close and personal, and it kind of matches. So it's been great. The honeymoon period is probably over here a little bit. Now we got some work to do, but it's been a lot of fun to come in the office. The staff has been great to work with to this point. So we know we have a lot of work in front of us. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but it's great. It's been great to have him around. Really has. Yeah, it's becoming more and more commonplace, I would say. Really, you want to try to be as healthy as you can by the end of the season and have your best players available. When you look at the teams that were participating in the postseason, that was the case. When you look at Kansas City, we're looking where Philadelphia ended up. So I would say the whole sports performance, injury, I would say, component of your team, we put a lot of time, a lot of resources into that. And it's really about giving the players the best opportunity, making sure they're resilient, making sure they're durable, and making sure they can go out there and they physically can perform the job that they're asked to do. Injuries are part of the sport. And so what we need to do is build a team where if we lose a player or two here or there, that we have some supplementary pieces in place. So I think holistically the league is looking at that. It's becoming more and more commonplace, and I think teams and organizations are allocating more resources to that particular area. Yeah, I think there's a number of players that can help different teams. They come in different shapes and sizes. So I think in the end you got to decide, what's important, what do you prioritize? I'm not going to tell you what that is, but what's important to you and then how you build a team. I think when you look at what Philly did, I mean, there's a good example of how Shane and Nick kind of built their team, built an offense around what Jalen did well. So really what you want to do with every player on your team is what do they do well? What are the things that we can give them to do well and give them the best opportunity to do that? So really that's the focus. It's not one size fits all. So you have to figure out what do you value, what's most important, and then build your team accordingly. And then give that player the opportunity to go out there and perform. And don't ask him to do something that, quite frankly, he doesn't do well.
Nick, what is the process to find the team needs in the later rounds?
Yeah, good question, Sarge. It's not necessarily team needs. It's really more player-specific or player-driven. I think a lot of teams have had success in kind of rounds 5 through 7 and then post-draft free agency. So the same process that you use with the early round picks, you apply to the end of the draft as well. And I would say we probably allocate as much time and resources to kind of those players at the later end of the round, at the end of the draft, than we do at the front end. If you can't figure out the players on the front end, we got bigger problems, right? So once we can kind of put a player to bed, we're the thought process, okay, let's move on from the player. We kind of know what that is. All right, let's focus on the next group. And then we have certain players graded at certain levels, kind of that later round. We're not a round-based team. We're kind of numerically based where we grade a player for their role. So there is a role commensurate with their value. So we try to identify the line of demarcation, drafted, not drafted. But that grouping of players, really, between now and probably the draft, that's where the next 2 months we're going to put as much time and resource into that group because how you can build a team a number of different ways, and those players are sometimes as important because they're cost effective and they can kind of supplement some of the things you do at the front end of your roster. So say we take a lot of pride. I don't want to speak for other teams in the league, but I think teams take a lot of pride in being able to find players in the late rounds because it just goes to show you there's good football players that are literally throughout the draft, and you don't want to limit yourself and say, well, if we don't get this guy in the first round, then we can't put a team together. I think that's probably an inaccurate characterization. Go ahead, Aaron. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good defensive players that are available in this draft, like there is most years. I think that's an area or position. I mean, we're gonna look at the way D'Amico plays defense, the way Matt and D'Amico want to play defense. So, like, do we have the players that fit that style? If we don't have the players, where are they? Okay, are they in free agency? All right, they have certain traits and characteristics. All right, let's go try to find some of them. All right, who are the players in the draft that fit? Not every player is going to fit. So just because the guy's a good player, maybe one system, all right, maybe he doesn't necessarily fit what we're trying to do. So that's part of our job, part of our responsibility to try to find players that fit how we're going to play philosophically, both offensively and defensively. And, can't forget about the kicking game because the kicking game is just as important as any. And I'd say that's probably one of the areas we've had a lot of success over the past couple of years because we devoted time and resources in its important phase. And that thought process and mindset is certainly not going to change now. Yeah, I'd say we're kind of in the team building process here. So every player, every individual situation, we'll look at it, and then ultimately we'll do what we feel is best for the team and the organization moving forward.
How do you look at the Bears possibly trading Nick before you guys maybe get jumped by a team that has similar needs? I'm obviously talking quarterback team that want to get into that trade picture.
Yeah, I think we're focused on the Texans. We're not necessarily worried about what other teams around us are doing. I mean, you're cognizant of that, but ultimately you have to be prepared to pick wherever you're going to pick and then be prepared to pick whatever player. So I'd say most teams, again, not to generalize here, but most teams, wherever they pick, you probably have 3 or 4 guys that you would feel comfortable taking. So if a team is in front of you and you're only talking about one player, well, that's going to leave 2 or 3 other players. So you're either comfortable with that group of players or you're not. So again, you can't really get too caught up in what other teams are doing. You just try to make decisions that you feel are best for your team and your situation.
Has your philosophy changed on free agency now that you got a little money to spend?
In terms of which way, John? I mean, what?
You've signed a lot of guys, but you haven't paid a lot of money players in this division. Do that, or do you think you're staying?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're trying to add good football players to the team however we do it. So there's a cost associated with each player. I'd say sometimes players make it to free agency for a reason. So are you paying premium dollar for good players? So what's the cost-benefit analysis there? So if that's the right decision for your team and that player is going to make a difference, then we're going to go ahead and do that. If there's other options, then what's the alternative? So free agency is about what are the alternatives, what's the cost associated with the player, how big of a commitment are you willing to make, what's the role you're going to have. And I would say we're very, let's say specific about role relative to value. So if they match up, great. If there's a mismatch, it's like, spending too much money on a car that you can get cheaper, right? That can do the job just as effectively. So, again, our philosophy isn't changed. We're trying to add good players however we do it. There's a cost associated with every player. So this is the time to kind of evaluate the market and kind of see where players, where they fit. I mean, you all have followed the league long enough. I mean, how many times a year or two after free agency, it's the greatest free agent signing ever, and then a year to cutting a player. I mean, so I don't think we want to be in that situation because it's not a good use of resources and capital. So try to make good decisions, try to add really good players to our team that can help us, and we're not going to change that, in terms of what our philosophy is. Go ahead here in the middle. Yeah, what I would say is really the draft kind of takes on, it's very similar. There's going to be groups of players, certain positions that have more players than others. There's more supply and demand of some positions relative to others, but there's good football players littered throughout. I mean, you go through the league, Stephon Diggs, okay, where was he picked? He was picked in the 5th round, right? Okay, so he wasn't a first-round pick. So there's a lot of good players throughout the draft. Our job is to know as many players top to bottom, both the front end of the spectrum as well as the back end and in the middle, and just try to figure out, how are we positioned. I would say we're positioned right now as we speak in a pretty good spot, 2 1s, a 2, 2 3s, and then we have a 4. So what is it? I don't know, 5 or 6 picks in the top 75, 100 or whatever it is. So you would think that you're going to find good players within those areas. So that's what the focus is. So kind of what I alluded to a little bit earlier. It's not about one player. It's not about one position. It's not about one pick. It's kind of about building your team and trying to find players all throughout. Yeah, we'll look at all that. We actually had kind of a trade chart simulator where you factor in the points and what's the cost associated with it. I would say it's twofold. Some teams kind of have an analytically driven chart. Okay, here's what that summation of the numbers is, and then you have the old Jimmy chart. So I think most teams are still using the traditional Jimmy chart as a reference point, but each team has their own sort of model. The issue you have is you're trying to do a trade. Their model says one thing, your model says another thing, so we're like speaking 2 different languages. So how do we find a resolution? So we'll run I think that's a little bit more of an exercise as we get into April. All right, we're positioned here. What would it cost to move up one spot? Okay, we're at 12. What would it cost to move up a few spots? What would it cost to move back? So we'll look at all those. I mean, February 28th is probably not the time to do that. Yeah, I mean, I've never talked about timeline. I've never talked about rebuild. What we've tried to do is each year is its own entity, kind of look at our team, try to build a team for that year, focus on 2023, with an eye to 24. I think I've talked about this, try to really look at it in sort of 2-year windows. So 23 and 24, how are you positioned, draft capital, players under contract, cap space, all those types of things. So it's kind of a moving target. So you have to be ready to adjust and adapt as you go. So I think the more flexibility you have, I think that's really what kind of our mindset has always been.
Nick, you talked about the extra picks that you do have just when you're an organization in this situation. Just what kind of flexibility and opportunity does it provide you to just get more good players you like, or maybe move up or move around in the draft?
No, you said it right there in the question. It kind of gives you some optionality, so which you don't necessarily always have. So we've kind of created some optionality for ourselves organizationally. But in the end, it's about what do we do with those picks, with those resources. So we can have all the resources in the world, but if you don't use them wisely, and again, the draft, and we've talked about this, there's an element of chance with just about every player that you take. So I don't want to say it's a 50-50 proposition, but in some respects it is. And then the later you get, the percentages go down. So I think we've positioned ourselves in a pretty good spot. So what we do now in terms of our actions will be more important than anything else. Yeah, you're looking at the profile of the player, and sometimes it's some non-football related things like their work ethic, their mindset, how do they take coaching, their willingness to improve. You know, there's a lot of factors that go into being a really great player. Are they committed to being great? A lot of people talk about being a great player. Is the player actually committed to being great? So the physical is very important, like how well they play on the field in the end. Like that's what people care about. That's what's going to make them a good player. But there's so many other things that go into it. So our job is to evaluate those traits and characteristics and make sure we're identifying the players that have the right qualities. D'Amico's talked about this, the swarm mindset, that whole mentality. So that's going to be pervasive throughout the organization. So trying to identify and find players with that mindset, and the more types of people and more types of players we get in the building with that mindset, then it'll give ourselves a better chance, hopefully. It's a very articulate way of saying that, but it is. Like how important football is to the person matters. So everybody plays, but in the end, they're transitioning from, I'd say these players are transitioning from, okay, they've gone to class, they've gone to school. This is your full-time job. This is a full-time commitment, and honestly, it's a year-long endeavor. So are you committed to actually doing that when the season's over? What do you do? What's your process? Do you have a routine that's in place? What are you doing to proactively recover? There's so many things along the way, and when you look at some of the great players over the course of our league and history, you know, I mean, everybody obviously talks about how great of a player Tom is, but everything that Tom put into being a great player sometimes isn't talked enough about. So players like Tom, players like Jerry Rice, we're talking about arguably two of the best players at their position, but there's a reason that they had such longevity. So not everybody is wired that way. So are there players that have those traits and characteristics? They're out there. Our job is to kind of find them. And I think what Brandon said, their give a crap level absolutely matters, is important. First part of that question, sorry, I missed that. Yeah, it's a space game, and it's a multiple receiver, multiple defensive back game. So I don't know what the percentages are. You guys probably look at it. It's probably around 70% nickel defense. So nobody plays base defense anymore, right? So how do you handle the different personnel groupings? So you're trying to defend space horizontally and vertically, and teams are really doing a good job of, say, implementing some of the concepts in college to our game. So trying to stay ahead on some of those trends. The league's constantly evolving, and I think we have to evolve at our end as well. So how we evaluate players, what we evaluate, what we put a premium on, all those types of things are relevant. I think that was the last one. Yeah, thank you.